Hello everyone, welcome in. This is section 2.2, pre-production process overview, and HAVTZA's Coloso class. All the way here, step-by-step guide to indie animation production. So welcome into class everyone. If you're following along through the course on Coloso, you might see that the classes are titled differently. I'm not sure if I just completely misread them or if they recently changed, but I'm pretty sure class 1 and class 2 of this section have changed in titles, at least for sure this section, so forgive me for any differences that might not be accurate to the course. In any case, welcome into class. This was honestly a really interesting lecture, and it was the first long-term lecture to come from HAVTZA's course so far, and it was super interesting to see as she showed background work during her entire lecture, so super interesting to watch and just kind of see her process moving through her own project scope and design. So really today is about getting started and some tips and tricks that she kind of offers as insights for beginning and how to really keep in a positive mindset for animating. As always, if you're enjoying the content so far, make sure to subscribe, stay in tune with any updates as this review series goes along throughout the course. So jumping right into things, the key to creation is considered to be inspiration, but it's not consistent and is unsustainable, and it's just a bad tool to rely upon solely. So HAVTZA kind of starts along with this idea about how to frame yourself in a positive mindset in order to last long-term, working through art, animation, etc., etc. She kind of talks about how just relying solely upon like the creative drive and how you view your projects is just going to lead to really quick burnout. So you kind of have to reframe things in a way that's more positive and growth mindset oriented. So motivation too is limiting as well, as you end up running out of different messages and is subject to variance. Obviously you can wake up different days super motivated to get stuff done, other days you don't even want to crawl out of bed. I'm sure we've all had that feeling. In order to combat this, remove the importance of your works from the work process in order to maintain constant creative works. So she talks a little bit more about things like here, which is creating for the sake of the process rather than the product. And that's key to keeping motivation up. So really, this is a solid takeaway that kind of encapsulates that point, which is to ask yourself, what do you want to practice before starting? And then combine those things into something that you can showcase in all of those aspects. So really, instead of framing each project as the project itself and the scope and what you want to show, a good way to avoid burnout is to sort of view each project as a practice point, narrow some things down that you can really focus on, and then develop the project so that you can showcase those things that you're practicing. Keep in mind, and it's rephrased down here later in the document, that you really don't want to be doing this for professional projects. This is just for your own personal projects as a scope. Keep in mind, you can always get better or find something to practice in each single time, and then look in at the world and people around you as sources for things to practice as well, and try to think about the reasons or features that they design if you're going to use them. So if you're going to be looking at other illustrators and animators, looking at their specific stylistic choices or design choices and understanding why might help you develop a little bit more into your own style as well, and things that you might also need to practice on as well. Set clear goals and strive to achieve them in each product rather than striving to finish each product alone, and using this mindset, the more you create leads to direct improvement of something or another, rather than if you're following this creative pursuit for each project, you might end up neglecting certain aspects of things that you need to practice on because you're so focused on trying to deliver this message and this theme in your art rather than just practicing on the art itself. Try practicing different things at a time. And as mentioned earlier, working with clients is not the place for trying new things or new things to practice on. So make sure you've got at least a consistent basis to showcase and work with your clients with. And then from here, we can go into the keys to understanding the purpose of your animation and your limitations as an artist, which will help you set in how to take on workload as an artist/animator. The first is to determine the amount of work that you can take on at the start. So adjust your workload accordingly. So you want to consider the amount of time you can work minus the physical accommodations. So if you need to do any stretching, if you've got a bad wrist or a bad joint that you kind of need to take it easy on, and that might take you a little bit more time. Breaks and other obligations to determine your workload time amount as well. So if you've got laundry to do, if you're working from home, cooking, showering, etc., etc. Remember to account for proper and appropriate rest as well. This is big, do not neglect this. Rest is also very, very important for settling in long-term memory, and you don't want to be forgetting a lot of this stuff as you learn and progress as an artist. So make sure you're getting proper sleep as well. I'm one to talk, and then concentration is a skill that builds over time, so it does develop with everything else. If you're having trouble concentrating, that is something you can work on. Just set yourself reasonable goals, meet them, and then reward yourself with a reasonable break, rinse and repeat. Next is to understand the project purpose and goal. So the goal is always to complete the client's job, obviously because you're getting paid by it, which may enforce limitations to your project scope, so keep that in mind. When considering focuses for the general public, however, versus a personal and private client, consider where is the art going to be viewed by and by who? What are you looking to accomplish with your work personally? And then how much work are you willing to put into it as a project? So understanding the project purpose and goal kind of has this duality of whether it's for professional content versus like a personal project that you're posting on social media. And they're definitely considered differently. So consider the work and to where and who it will be aimed towards when you're designing your project. The audience can also induce limitations as mentioned, but for social media, you really want to aim for eye-catching and relatable videos. So that might limit your project scope a little bit, and then for professionals, aim for high quality and then whatever limitations they may impose on you as a guideline. And then to get ideas and avoid burnout, set artistic and production goals, know what you're aiming to practice or what limitations you need to account for, and all of this is to avoid frustration and really keep a consistent and meaningful flow with your work. So then from here, besides the professional insights from HAVTZA, she talks about how she really starts an animation and her recommendation, which she normally has two approaches. The first of which is what she titles dynamic motion, which is really when the action of the animation is the focus itself, which as she talks about normally starts with a rough animatic just to really get the feel of the action of the animation down. And then from there, she designs a storyboard for understanding the action and really how she wants the cinematography to flow, and then adding the context and the scenes around it, and everything else that would build up that animation in order to focus around the action. The other approach is called moving illustration, and that's when the focus of the animation is the aesthetic appeal of the animation and not the motion necessarily itself. So this is achieved by starting and creating a rough color thumbnail, which is going to design concepts first that you want to incorporate into your animation and how they look and feel. From there, you can add supporting frames, which will continue the feel of the animation for appropriate context, story, and action/animation to the feel. She mentions that these aren't really concrete approaches, so one or a mix of the approaches can be used and are normally taken on a scene-by-scene basis. So you might have this lead up to an action scene, which is really building the feel and developing on this moving illustration front. And then you might have another scene right after that where the fight starts or whatever, and that switches to a dynamic motion where you're planning this sequence of scenes out, focused solely on the action that's developing in the scene. And then she mentions, just as a last tip, that a good approach for clients in determining project desirables and showing vision of the project for transparency with client comes from one of these two approaches as well. So not only are they good for planning out your own animation on a scene-by-scene basis, but it also helps illustrate key scenes in your animation that you might need to have discrepancy over with your client. And she mentions that it's always better to communicate early, which is why both of these approaches are really good in outlining everything first and foremost. So a quick summary on all of this: focus on a process-oriented mindset rather than a project-oriented mindset to avoid burnout from relying upon inspiration and motivation to drive you forwards, and instead focus on growth and improvement with practice. Design your project scopes around the considerations of yourself and your audience in consideration of each, and to know the two main approaches for starting an animation project in order to get comfortable with sketching and designing ideas for starting your animation projects. And then the self-assigned homework that I thought was appropriate is to write down a basic idea or two for each type of approach to starting an animation project, or some back pocket projects for later, ideas that you can then use the animation process that we'll learn later in order to actually animate these projects and ideas of yours. So super exciting stuff. These are really, really important tips that I think are good to consider professionally and long-term if you're going to be a freelance or commercial animator. So keep these points in mind, and they're very insightful statements from HAVTZA to learn from. Again, if you're following along on Coloso, this was a super interesting lecture to watch just because of the background footage. And the lecture actually ends about halfway, and the rest of the video is just her showing her development process for an animation that she sequenced. It was super interesting stuff to watch and kind of see her own creative process that if you want to study visually, it's a really good resource. So I would highly recommend just watching through the background of the lecture if you're not going to be paying attention to the lecture itself too much. But in any case, that was section 2.2 of HAVTZA's course. Remember that if you guys are looking for any other content by me that is coming soon, or just updates for further class reviews, you can see all of that on most of my socials, which I'll link around here for you guys to check out. as well as if you have any questions that you need answered, you can leave them in the comments or on any of the socials as well. I'm more than happy to try and answer them for y'all. Again, thanks so much for joining in on this lecture review, and I hope to see all of you guys in the next lecture review. Remember to take it easy. Bye-bye.